Sarah Chen adjusted her worn baseball cap as she walked through the bustling corridors of the Orbital Defense Station. Her engineering uniform was stained with hydraulic fluid, and her toolkit clinked softly against her hip with each step. To everyone around her, she was just another maintenance engineer, someone who kept the lights on and the air recyclers humming. Nobody gave her a second glance as she made her way to the fighter bay. The station, designated Outpost Delta 7, floated in the shadow of Europa, one of Jupiter's largest moons. It served as humanity's first line of defense against the increasing threats from the Outer Rim territories. Tensions had been escalating for months with an aggressive alien coalition known as the Hegemony, who viewed human expansion into their traditional hunting grounds as an act of war. Sarah had been stationed here for 8 months, quietly performing her duties while observing everything around her. The fighter pilots strutted through the corridors with their flight suits and confident swagger, discussing their latest training exercises and combat simulations. They barely acknowledged the support staff, treating engineers and technicians as invisible pieces of the machinery that kept their world running. Commander Marcus Webb was particularly dismissive. A decorated veteran with 17 confirmed kills, he led the station's elite squadron with an iron fist and an ego to match. During briefings, he would often joke about how real pilots were born, not made, completely unaware that the quiet engineer in the corner had more flight hours than his entire squadron combined. The truth was that Sarah Chen had been flying since she was 12 years old. Growing up on the agricultural colony of New Harvest, she had learned to pilot crop dusters and atmospheric fighters out of necessity. When raiders began attacking farming settlements, the colonists had to defend themselves. Sarah quickly discovered she had an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional combat that few could match. Her natural talent caught the attention of the Colonial Defense Force, who recruited her at 17. She excelled in the academy, graduating at the top of her class in both piloting and tactical strategy. But Sarah had always preferred working behind the scenes. She understood that intelligence gathering and preparation were often more valuable than flashy heroics. When the opportunity arose to work undercover as an engineer on Outpost Delta 7, Sarah volunteered immediately. Her mission was to assess the station's defensive capabilities and identify potential weaknesses that could be exploited by enemy forces. What she discovered troubled her deeply. The pilots were skilled but overconfident. They relied too heavily on their advanced technology and had grown complacent during the long peace. Their formations were textbook perfect but predictable. Most concerning of all, they had never faced an enemy who could match their technological advantages. Sarah spent her days maintaining the fighter craft, learning every system and subsystem intimately. She memorized fuel consumption rates, weapon reload times, and the subtle handling characteristics of each individual aircraft. The other engineers appreciated her thorough work, never suspecting that she was actually conducting detailed reconnaissance. In the evenings, she would retreat to her small quarters and compile reports for her handlers back on Earth. Her recommendations were always the same. The station needed better tactical training, more diverse combat strategies, and a deeper understanding of their potential enemies. Her warnings were largely ignored by the military bureaucracy, filed away as the overcautious observations of a support technician. The Hegemony had been watching humanity's expansion with growing alarm. Their scouts reported that human technology was advancing rapidly, and their military forces were becoming increasingly sophisticated. The alien coalition decided that a preemptive strike was necessary to halt human expansion before it became unstoppable. Intelligence reports suggested that humanity's orbital defense network was their greatest strength. By eliminating key stations like Outpost Delta 7, the Hegemony could create gaps in human defenses that would allow for rapid territorial advancement. They began planning a massive coordinated assault designed to overwhelm human forces before they could mount an effective response. Sarah noticed the increased chatter on long-range communication channels. Her engineering duties gave her access to sensor arrays and communication equipment that pilots rarely monitored. She began detecting unusual energy signatures at the edge of the system, consistent with cloaked vessels conducting reconnaissance. When she tried to report her findings to Commander Webb, he dismissed her concerns with a condescending smile. Engineers, he explained, often misinterpreted routine sensor anomalies as signs of enemy activity. He assured her that his pilots would handle any threats that materialized, and she should focus on keeping their ships running smoothly. Frustrated but undeterred, Sarah continued her surveillance. She noticed patterns in the energy signatures that suggested a large fleet was gathering just beyond the range of human sensors. The timing and positioning indicated they were preparing for a major offensive operation. Her reports to Earth grew increasingly urgent, but the response was always the same. Maintain cover and continue gathering intelligence. The other support staff began to notice Sarah's increased anxiety. She had always been quiet and focused, but lately she seemed distracted and tense. Some attributed it to the general stress of military life, while others wondered if she was having personal problems. None of them suspected that she was preparing for the battle of her life. In her spare time, Sarah began conducting unauthorized maintenance on Fighter 7, an older model that had been relegated to backup status. She optimized its engine performance, calibrated its weapon systems to peak efficiency, and made subtle modifications that would give it an edge in combat. To anyone watching, it appeared that she was simply being thorough in her duties. The station's daily routine continued unchanged. Pilots ran their training exercises, engineers maintained equipment, and command staff planned for contingencies that they never expected to face. The sense of complacency was palpable, a dangerous overconfidence born from years of technological superiority and unchallenged dominance. Sarah knew that this peaceful routine was about to end. The signs were all there for anyone who knew how to read them. Increased subspace interference, subtle gravitational anomalies, and the growing silence from outer system monitoring posts. The hegemony was coming, and they were bringing overwhelming force to ensure that humanity's expansion ended at Outpost Delta 7. As she completed her evening maintenance routine, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to the unsuspecting people around her. When the attack came, she would be ready. The quiet engineer who nobody noticed was about to remind everyone why the human spirit could never be underestimated, no matter how impossible the odds appeared to be. The first sign of trouble came during the morning shift change. Sarah was replacing a faulty plasma conduit in Fighter 12 when the station's long-range sensors began detecting massive gravitational distortions at the edge of the system. The readings were unlike anything the monitoring stations had recorded before, indicating the presence of something enormous approaching at impossible speeds. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the sensor technician on duty, stared at his displays with growing confusion. The gravitational signatures suggested a fleet of unprecedented size, but visual confirmation was impossible due to advanced stealth technology. He immediately contacted Commander Webb, who arrived at the command center within minutes. His usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine concern. Sarah continued her work, listening carefully to the increasingly frantic communications echoing through the station's corridors. Her worst fears were being confirmed with each passing minute. The energy signatures she had been tracking for weeks were finally revealing themselves as the advance elements of a massive hegemony invasion force. The alien fleet consisted of over 200 vessels, ranging from nimble fighters to massive dreadnoughts capable of devastating entire planetary surfaces. Their technology was more advanced than human intelligence had predicted, incorporating energy shields that could deflect most conventional weapons and propulsion, systems that allowed for instantaneous tactical repositioning. Commander Webb immediately ordered the station to full combat alert. Warning klaxons echoed through every corridor as personnel rushed to their battle stations. The 12 fighters of Delta Squadron were hastily prepped for launch, their pilots displaying a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that Sarah recognized from her own combat experience. The hegemony's strategy was brutally simple and devastatingly effective. They would use their numerical superiority to overwhelm human defenses, while their advanced technology neutralized humanity's tactical advantages. Intelligence indicated that similar attacks were being launched simultaneously against 7 other key defensive positions throughout human space. As the alien fleet approached, their vessels began dropping out of stealth mode in a coordinated display of overwhelming force. The sight was both terrifying and magnificent. Hundreds of sleek predatory shapes emerging from the void like a school of metallic sharks. Their hulls gleamed with an otherworldly phosphorescence, and their weapons arrays crackled with barely contained energy. Delta Squadron launched immediately, their 12 fighters looking pitifully small against the approaching armada. Commander Webb led them in a tight formation, following standard tactical doctrine that called for coordinated attacks against priority targets. It was exactly the kind of predictable response that Sarah had warned against in her reports. The engagement began badly for the human forces. The hegemony fighters moved with fluid grace that suggested either superior pilot training or advanced flight assistance systems. Their weapons fired with pinpoint accuracy, and their energy shields absorbed most incoming fire without visible effect. Within the first 5 minutes of combat, Delta Squadron had lost 3 fighters with no confirmed enemy casualties. Sarah watched the battle unfold from the command center, her engineering duties forgotten as she analyzed the tactical situation. The human pilots were fighting bravely but ineffectively, using formations and strategies that were easily countered by their technologically superior opponents. Their only advantage was intimate knowledge of the local space terrain, but they were failing to exploit it properly. The situation deteriorated rapidly as more hegemony vessels joined the battle. Their capital ships began targeting the station itself, sending massive energy bolts that shook the entire structure. Emergency power kicked in as primary systems failed, casting the corridors in an eerie red glow that emphasized the desperate nature of their circumstances. Commander Webb's voice crackled over the communication system, ordering his remaining pilots to fall back to the station's defensive perimeter. His tactical assessment was grimly realistic. They were outnumbered 20-1, outgunned by superior technology, and facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The battle was rapidly becoming a massacre. Sarah made her decision in that moment. She had spent months preparing for this exact scenario, and she knew that conventional tactics would only result in the complete destruction of Outpost Delta 7. The time for maintaining her cover had passed. Now was the moment to act on everything she had learned during her covert mission. She moved quickly through the chaotic corridors, her engineer's uniform allowing her to pass unnoticed among the panicked support staff. Fighter 7 was still in the maintenance bay, fully fueled and armed according to her careful preparations. The hangar crew was too busy with emergency procedures to pay attention to one more person entering the restricted area. The fighter's cockpit welcomed her like an old friend. Sarah's hands moved automatically across the control surfaces, activating systems in the precise sequence she had memorized during countless maintenance sessions. The engine responded with a smooth purr that indicated perfect mechanical condition, a testament to the hours of careful preparation she had invested. As she completed her pre-flight checklist, Sarah could hear the continuing reports from the battle outside. Delta Squadron was down to 7 operational fighters, and the hegemony forces were pressing their advantage with ruthless efficiency. The station's defensive weapons were having minimal impact against the alien shields, and it was only a matter of time before the enemy achieved complete tactical superiority. The hangar bay doors opened to reveal the chaos of space combat. Laser fire crisscrossed the void in deadly patterns while explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the starfield. The hegemony fleet moved with predatory confidence, their formations tight and disciplined as they systematically eliminated human resistance. Sarah launched Fighter 7 without clearance or authorization, her departure noticed only by a few bewildered hangar technicians who assumed she was following emergency evacuation protocols. The fighter responded perfectly to her commands, its familiar controls allowing her to blend seamlessly into the ongoing battle without attracting immediate attention from either side. Her first priority was assessment and positioning. Sarah used the fighter's sensors to analyze the enemy formations, looking for patterns and weaknesses that could be exploited. Her engineering background proved them invaluable as she identified specific technological vulnerabilities in the hegemony designs that conventional pilots might miss. The alien fighters relied heavily on their energy shields and superior speed, but Sarah noticed that their defensive systems showed brief fluctuations during rapid maneuvering. Their weapons were devastatingly effective, but required significant charging time between volleys. Most importantly, their pilots seemed to follow rigid tactical doctrines that made their movements predictable to someone who understood their strategic thinking. Commander Webb's voice filled the communication channels, demanding to know the identity of the unauthorized pilot who had joined the battle. Sarah maintained radio silence, knowing that revealing her identity would only create confusion and potentially compromise her tactical advantages. She needed to remain anonymous until she could demonstrate her capabilities beyond any doubt. The moment of truth was rapidly approaching. Sarah positioned Fighter 7 at the edge of the combat zone, using a debris field for concealment while she selected her first target. The hegemony formation was exactly as predictable as she had anticipated, their lead elements maintaining precise spacing that would allow for devastating concentrated fire if she could position herself correctly. Taking a deep breath, Sarah engaged her fighter's afterburners and dove into the heart of the enemy formation. The quiet engineer was about to become humanity's most unlikely hero, armed with superior knowledge, desperate courage, and 20 years of combat experience that nobody suspected she possessed. Sarah's fighter screamed through space at maximum velocity, closing the distance to the hegemony formation faster than their sensors could properly track. She had calculated her approach vector to exploit a blind spot in their overlapping sensor coverage, using the gravitational distortion from Europa's mass to mask her energy signature until the last possible moment. The lead hegemony fighter never saw her coming. Sarah's first shot penetrated its shields during the brief fluctuation she had observed during their tactical analysis. The plasma bolt struck the alien vessel's primary power coupling, triggering a cascade failure that consumed the entire ship in a brilliant explosion. One enemy down, with the element of surprise still intact. The destruction of their lead fighter sent ripples of confusion through the hegemony formation. Their rigid tactical doctrine had no provisions for attacks from unexpected vectors, and their formation began to waver as individual pilots attempted to locate the threat. Sarah used their momentary disorganization to position herself for a second attack. Fighter 7 responded to her commands like an extension of her own body. Every modification she had made during her covert maintenance work paid dividends as the ship's enhanced maneuverability allowed her to dance between incoming fire. The hegemony pilots were skilled, but they had never faced an opponent who understood their technology better than they did themselves. Her second target was the formation's communication ship. Easily identified by its distinctive antenna arrays and central position, Sarah approached from below, using the planet's terminator line to silhouette her target against Europa's pale surface. The alien pilot attempted an evasive maneuver, but Sarah had anticipated the move and adjusted her aim accordingly. The communication ship exploded in a shower of sparks and debris, severing the tactical link between the attacking formation and their command vessel. Individual hegemony fighters began operating independently, their coordinated assault dissolving into scattered engagements that played to Sarah's strengths as a lone fighter pilot. Back on Outpost Delta 7, the command center erupted in confused excitement. Commander Webb and his staff watched in amazement as the mysterious Fighter 7 carved through the enemy formation with surgical precision. The unknown pilot's tactics were unlike anything they had seen before, combining aggressive offense with defensive maneuvering that seemed to anticipate every enemy response. The remaining members of Delta Squadron were equally stunned. They had been fighting desperately for survival, gradually losing ground to superior numbers and technology. Now they watched as a single fighter accomplished more in 2 minutes than their entire squadron had managed in 20. Whoever was piloting Fighter 7 was operating on a completely different level. Sarah's third kill came as she exploited the confusion caused by the loss of their communication ship. A hegemony fighter had broken formation to pursue what it thought was a damaged human vessel, leaving itself isolated from supporting fire. Sarah intercepted it during its attack run, her precise gunnery disabling its shields and primary weapons before delivering the killing blow. The psychological impact on the hegemony forces was becoming apparent. Their pilots began flying more defensively, clustering together for mutual support instead of maintaining their aggressive attack patterns. This defensive posture reduced their tactical effectiveness and gave the human defenders breathing room to reorganize their own scattered forces. Sarah keyed her radio for the first time since launching, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos surrounding her. She identified herself only as Ghost 7 and began issuing tactical instructions to the surviving Delta Squadron pilots. Her analysis of the enemy formations was precise and actionable, providing targeting priorities and recommended attack vectors that maximized their chances of success. Lieutenant Morrison, Flying Fighter 3, was the first to follow Ghost 7's instructions. He approached his assigned target from the vector Sarah had specified, waiting for the shield fluctuation she had predicted. When the moment came, His shots struck home with devastating effect, adding a fourth hegemony fighter to the growing casualty list. The tide of battle was beginning to shift. The hegemony formation, once a picture of disciplined aggression, was now fractured and reactive. Their pilots were skilled, but they had been trained to fight as part of a coordinated unit. Individual combat against an opponent who seemed to know their every weakness was proving far more challenging. Sarah's fourth kill demonstrated her growing understanding of hegemony tactics. She had noticed that their fighters used predictable evasion patterns when under direct attack, a limitation that suggested either programmed flight assistance or rigid training protocols. By firing where the enemy would be rather than where it was, she was able to achieve hits that conventional targeting would have missed. The alien pilot never had a chance to adjust his defensive pattern. Sarah's shots arrived precisely where her calculations had predicted, overwhelming his shields and destroying his propulsion system. The crippled fighter spun helplessly away from the battle, its pilot's ejection pod quickly retrieved by automated rescue systems. Commander Webb finally managed to establish direct communication with Ghost 7, demanding to know the pilot's identity and authorization for joining the battle. Sarah's response was characteristically direct. She was here to fight, her identity was irrelevant, and authorization could be sorted out after they had dealt with the immediate threat to the station. The hegemony forces were adapting to the new tactical situation, but their response revealed another weakness that Sarah was quick to exploit. Their capital ships began concentrating fire on Fighter 7, treating the unknown pilot as a priority threat. This shift in targeting priorities reduced the pressure on the station's defensive systems and created opportunities for the surviving Delta Squadron pilots. Sarah used the enemy's fixation on her to execute a complex maneuver that would have been impossible without her intimate knowledge of the local space terrain. She dove toward Europa's surface, using the moon's atmosphere to mask her heat signature, while the hegemony capital ship's heavy weapons caused massive explosions in the thin atmospheric layer above her. The maneuver served multiple purposes. It drew enemy fire away from more vulnerable targets, demonstrated to the human defenders that their seemingly hopeless situation was far from over, and positioned Sarah for her most ambitious attack yet. The hegemony flagship had moved closer to the planet to coordinate the concentrated assault on Ghost 7, bringing it within range of a desperate gambit. As she skimmed through Europa's upper atmosphere, Sarah transmitted detailed targeting information to the station's heavy weapons. Her engineering background had given her access to the defensive system's technical specifications, and she knew exactly how to coordinate a joint attack that would overwhelm even a capital ship's defenses. The plan required precise timing and perfect execution. Sarah would emerge from atmospheric cover to engage the flagship's escort fighters, while the station's guns targeted its primary shields. If successful, they could cripple or destroy the enemy's command vessel and potentially break the entire attack force's morale. Fighter 7's hull began glowing red as it climbed back toward vacuum, the atmospheric friction heating its armor to dangerous levels. Sarah ignored the temperature warnings flashing across her display, focused entirely on the complex three-dimensional calculation that would determine whether her desperate plan succeeded or failed. The moment arrived with crystalline clarity. Sarah burst from Europa's atmosphere like an avenging angel, her fighter's weapons already charging as she acquired her fifth target. The hegemony escort fighters were positioned exactly where she had predicted, their attention focused on the planet's surface where they expected her to remain hidden. Her fifth kill was the most spectacular yet, a perfectly timed shot that struck an enemy fighter's ammunition storage and triggered a secondary explosion, visible from the station's observation decks. But this was only the beginning of Sarah's most audacious maneuver, as she prepared to demonstrate that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. The hegemony flagship loomed before Sarah like a metallic mountain, its hull bristling with weapon arrays and defensive systems that could annihilate her fighter with a single focused salvo. But she had identified a critical vulnerability during her months of intelligence gathering. The ship's primary command center was protected by overlapping shield generators that created a brief harmonic resonance every 47 seconds. Sarah's fighter climbed toward the massive vessel, weaving between defensive fire with movements that seemed to defy physics. Her enhanced reflexes and intuitive understanding of three-dimensional combat allowed her to anticipate incoming shots and adjust her trajectory. milliseconds before the enemy weapons could track her new position. The flagship's escort fighters moved to intercept, but Sarah had already transmitted their positions to Delta Squadron. Lieutenant Morrison and his wingman executed a perfectly coordinated attack that eliminated 2 escorts while Sarah continued her seemingly suicidal approach to the capital ship. Commander Webb watched from the station's command center, his face pale with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Ghost 7's attack pattern was beyond anything taught in military academies, combining textbook precision with innovative tactics that suggested either exceptional training or natural genius. The unknown pilot was flying like someone who had been born for combat. Sarah's chronometer showed 30 seconds until the next harmonic resonance. She adjusted her approach vector, using a piece of floating debris as cover while she calculated the precise firing solution required for her desperate gambit. The target was barely 2 meters wide, protected by multiple layers of shielding, and constantly moving as the flagship maneuvered to avoid the station's defensive fire. The hegemony capital ship's main guns were charging for what appeared to be a devastating attack on Outpost Delta 7. Energy. Readings indicated that the upcoming salvo would overwhelm the station's defensive systems and potentially destroy the entire facility. Sarah's attack was no longer just an opportunity for a spectacular victory. It had become absolutely necessary for survival. 20 seconds remaining. Sarah's fighters screamed past the flagship's secondary weapon arrays, close enough to see individual aliens through the vessel's observation ports. Their faces showed surprise and growing alarm as they realized that the small human fighter was not attempting to escape, but was instead positioning itself for an attack on their most heavily defended section. The station's heavy guns opened fire in perfect synchronization. With Sarah's approach, their massive energy bolts striking the flagship's primary shields and causing brilliant cascades of dissipating energy. The coordinated attack was working exactly as planned, overloading the alien vessel's defensive systems and creating the opening that Sarah needed. 10 seconds. Sarah rolled Fighter 7 inverted and dove toward the flagship's command section, her targeting computer struggling to maintain a lock on such a small target at such extreme range. The harmonic resonance was building in the overlapping shield generators, creating the brief window of vulnerability that her analysis had predicted. 5 seconds. The hegemony flagship's main guns reached full charge, their energy output sufficient to reduce Outpost Delta 7 to expanding plasma. Sarah could see the massive weapon arrays beginning to traverse toward the station, their movement slow but inexorable as they prepared to deliver the killing blow. 3 seconds. Sarah's targeting computer achieved final lock, the crosshairs centering on the tiny gap in the flagship's defenses. Her finger tightened on the firing stud as she whispered a brief prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening to desperate pilots in impossible situations. 1 second. The harmonic resonance reached its peak, creating a hole in the flagship's defenses that lasted exactly 0.7 seconds. Sarah's shot had to be perfect in both timing and accuracy, threading through multiple layers of shielding to strike a target smaller than her fighter's cockpit. She fired. The plasma bolt traveled across the intervening space in a line of brilliant blue energy, its path taking it through the gap in the shields at precisely the moment of maximum vulnerability. Sarah's shot struck the flagship's primary command center, penetrating the weakened defenses and detonating inside the vessel's most critical compartment. The explosion was visible as a brief flare of light from the flagship's command section, followed by a cascade of secondary explosions as critical systems failed throughout the massive vessel. The ship's main guns powered down as their targeting systems went offline. Their devastating attack on the station interrupted just seconds before firing. Sarah pulled Fighter 7 into a tight spiral, avoiding debris from the damaged flagship while seeking her next target. The capital ship was crippled but not destroyed, its massive bulk continuing to pose a threat to the station's defenders. She needed to press her advantage while the enemy forces were still reeling from the loss of their command vessel. The 6th Hegemony fighter fell to Sarah's guns as its pilot became distracted by the flagship's distress signals. The alien vessel was attempting to provide cover for damage control teams, but Sarah's attack came from an unexpected angle that exploited the pilot's tunnel vision. Her shots penetrated the fighter's rear shields and destroyed its primary reactor in a brilliant explosion. The psychological impact of Ghost 7's impossible shot rippled through both fleets. The human defenders suddenly found new hope in their desperate situation. while the hegemony forces began to question whether their technological superiority was sufficient to guarantee victory. The mysterious pilot had demonstrated that individual skill and determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Delta Squadron rallied around Ghost 7's example, their remaining pilots adopting more aggressive tactics as they realized the enemy could be defeated. Lieutenant Morrison scored his second kill by following Sarah's tactical advice, while Fighter 9 disabled a hegemony bomber before it could complete its attack run on the station's reactor. Section. Sarah's seventh and final target was already lining up for an attack on the crippled flagship, apparently intending to deliver a mercy shot that would put the massive vessel out of its misery. She intercepted the alien fighter during its approach, her guns speaking with deadly accuracy that sent another enemy pilot to whatever afterlife awaited warriors who died in honorable combat. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned decisively in humanity's favor. The hegemony attack force, once confident in their overwhelming superiority, now found themselves facing an opponent who refused to accept defeat. The mysterious Ghost 7 had reminded everyone that wars were won not by technology alone, but by the courage and skill of those willing to risk everything for victory. Commander Webb's voice filled the communication channels, his tone reflecting a mixture of awe and gratitude as he addressed the unknown pilot who had saved them all. He formally requested Ghost 7's identity and promised that appropriate recognition would be arranged for such extraordinary service. Sarah's response was characteristically modest. She identified herself only as someone who had been in the right place at the right time, with the right training to make a difference when it mattered most. Her true identity, she explained, was less important than ensuring that Outpost Delta 7 remained operational to defend against future attacks. The hegemony forces were beginning their withdrawal, their coordinated assault having degenerated into a costly defeat that would require months of planning to recover from. The flagship limped away under escort, its command functions transferred to a smaller vessel, whose crew was undoubtedly questioning the wisdom of challenging human determination. As the immediate threat receded, Sarah began the process of returning Fighter 7 to the station. Her fuel reserves were running low, and several systems showed damage from the intense maneuvering required during her attack runs. But she had accomplished something unprecedented. A single pilot had turned the tide of a major space battle through skill, preparation, and sheer audacity. The hangar bay was crowded with personnel eager to see the pilot who had saved them all. Sarah knew that her days of anonymity were over, but she also knew that her true mission was just beginning. The hegemony would return with better tactics and improved technology, and humanity needed to be ready for the next confrontation. Fighter 7 touched down in the hangar bay with a gentle thud that belied the violence it had just experienced. The ship's hull was scorched and pitted from enemy fire. Several armor plates showed stress fractures from the extreme maneuvering, and wisps of coolant vapor escaped from damaged heat exchangers. It looked like a fighter that had been through hell and somehow survived to tell the tale. The hangar bay fell silent as Sarah powered down the fighter's systems and began her post-flight shutdown procedures. Every person present watched the cockpit canopy with intense curiosity, wondering who could possibly be skilled enough to accomplish what they had just witnessed. Maintenance crews, pilots, and senior officers all waited with bated breath for the mystery to be solved. Commander Webb pushed through the crowd, his expression a mixture of anticipation and professional concern. He had lost 5 of his best pilots in the engagement, and while Ghost 7's intervention had saved the station, he needed to understand how and why an unauthorized pilot had been able to achieve such remarkable results. The cockpit canopy hissed open, and Sarah Chen emerged from Fighter 7 with the same calm efficiency she had always displayed during her engineering duties. Her flight suit was regulation issue, borrowed from the pilot ready room, and her face showed the focused concentration of someone who had just completed a difficult but successful mission. The silence stretched for several long seconds as the assembled personnel tried to process what they were seeing. The quiet engineer who had spent months maintaining their fighters had somehow transformed into the most skilled pilot any of them had ever witnessed. The cognitive dissonance was almost overwhelming. Lieutenant Morrison was the first to find his voice, his words echoing the thoughts of everyone present. He asked how it was possible that an engineer could fly better than trained combat pilots, his tone reflecting genuine confusion rather than accusation or resentment. Sarah's explanation was characteristically straightforward. She had been a pilot long before becoming an engineer, with extensive combat experience that predated her assignment to Outpost Delta 7. Her current position was part of a covert intelligence mission designed to assess the station's defensive capabilities and identify potential vulnerabilities. Commander Webb's reaction progressed through several distinct phases: surprise at discovering her true identity, anger at being deceived for months, admiration for her piloting skills, and finally professional respect for the mission she had been conducting. His questions came rapidly as he tried to understand the full scope of her activities on the station. Sarah answered each question with the same professional honesty she had always displayed. Yes, she had been gathering intelligence on their defensive capabilities. Yes, she had been submitting regular reports to her handlers on Earth. No, she had not been spying on individual personnel or monitoring their personal communications. Her mission had been purely tactical, focused on identifying systemic weaknesses that could be exploited by enemy forces. The revelation explained many small mysteries that had puzzled the station's personnel over the past months. Sarah's unusually thorough maintenance work, her deep knowledge of fighter systems, her apparent ability to predict mechanical failures before they occurred, and her subtle suggestions for tactical improvements all made perfect sense in the context of her true background. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the station's chief medical officer, stepped forward to examine Sarah for injuries sustained during the battle. Her professional assessment revealed several stress-related symptoms that were consistent with high-performance combat flying, including elevated heart rate, temporary vision effects from G-force exposure, and minor muscle strain from extended maneuvering. As news of Ghost 7's identity spread throughout the station, reactions varied widely among different personnel groups. The pilots initially felt a mixture of embarrassment and respect, realizing that someone they had largely ignored possessed skills that far exceeded their own. The engineering staff felt pride that one of their own had achieved such remarkable success, while also expressing amazement at Sarah's ability to maintain her cover for so many months. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, who had worked closely with Sarah on numerous maintenance projects, shook his head in wonder as he recalled their many conversations about fighter performance and tactical efficiency. Her insights, which he had attributed to engineering expertise, now revealed themselves as the observations of an experienced combat pilot analyzing the tools of her trade. Sarah's debriefing with Commander Webb and his senior staff lasted several hours as they worked through the tactical and strategic implications of her mission. Her reports contained detailed assessments of the station's strengths and weaknesses, recommendations for improved training protocols, and predictions about likely enemy attack strategies that had proven remarkably accurate. The most sobering revelation was that Outpost Delta 7 had been woefully unprepared for the type of coordinated assault they had just survived. Sarah's analysis indicated that without her intervention, the station would have been completely overwhelmed within the first 10 minutes of combat. The hegemony's tactical planning had been nearly perfect, exploiting every weakness she had identified in her reports. Her recommendations for improvement were extensive and detailed. The pilots needed training in more flexible tactics that could adapt to unexpected situations. The defensive systems required better integration to prevent the kind of coordinated enemy attacks that had nearly succeeded. Most importantly, the entire command structure needed to develop a better understanding of their opponent's capabilities and limitations. The question of Sarah's future assignment became a topic of intense discussion among the senior staff. Her cover had been completely blown, making continued intelligence gathering impossible. However, her demonstrated skills and intimate knowledge of the station's operations made her invaluable as a tactical advisor and pilot trainer. Commander Webb formally requested that Sarah be transferred to Delta Squadron as a flight instructor and tactical consultant. Her unique combination of engineering expertise and combat experience would be invaluable in preparing the station's defenses for future attacks. The hegemony would undoubtedly return with improved tactics, and humanity needed every advantage they could obtain. Sarah accepted the new assignment with the same quiet professionalism she had always displayed. She understood that her days of operating in the shadows were over, but she also recognized that her true value lay in sharing her knowledge and experience with others. The battle against the hegemony was far from over, and humanity would need many more skilled pilots if they hoped to survive the coming war. The engineering staff organized an impromptu celebration in Sarah's honor, their pride in her accomplishments evident in every speech and toast. They had always known she was exceptional at her job, but discovering that she was also a pilot of legendary skill made their association with her a source of genuine honor. Lieutenant Morrison approached Sarah privately to thank her for the tactical guidance that had allowed him to survive the battle. Her precise instructions had not only saved his life, but had also given him new insights into combat flying that would serve him well in future engagements. He requested permission to discuss her techniques with the other surviving pilots. Sarah agreed to share her knowledge freely, recognizing that the survival of humanity's defensive network depended on rapidly improving the skills of their fighter pilots. She began planning a comprehensive training program that would incorporate lessons learned from the recent battle while preparing for the more sophisticated attacks that were certain to come. As the station's personnel settled into their new reality, they found themselves looking at Sarah Chen with entirely different eyes. The quiet engineer who had once been virtually invisible had revealed herself to be one of humanity's most formidable defenders. Her story would become legend among the fleet, inspiring countless others to push beyond their perceived limitations in service of a cause greater than themselves. The transformation was complete. Sarah Chen, engineer and spy, had become Sarah Chen, pilot and teacher. The next phase of her mission was about to begin, and with it humanity's best hope for survival in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. The pilot briefing room had been transformed into Sarah's classroom, its walls now covered with tactical diagrams, enemy ship schematics, and combat analysis charts that she had compiled during her months of covert observation. The surviving members of Delta Squadron sat in uncomfortable chairs, their earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility as they prepared to learn from the woman they had once dismissed as just another engineer. Sarah stood before them wearing a flight suit that bore no rank insignia. Her authority derived not from military hierarchy, but from demonstrated competence under fire. Her first lesson was brutally honest. Everything they thought they knew about space combat was outdated, predictable and potentially lethal in the new reality of warfare against technologically superior opponents. Lieutenant Morrison raised his hand to ask about the fundamental difference between fighting human opponents and alien forces. Sarah's answer was illuminating. Human adversaries could be predicted because they shared common training, tactical doctrines, and psychological frameworks. Alien opponents required completely different analytical approaches based on understanding their technology, biology, and cultural attitudes toward warfare. The hegemony, she explained, approached combat as a form of ritualized hunting where overwhelming force was considered more honorable than clever tactics. Their pilots were skilled but constrained by rigid behavioral patterns that made them vulnerable to unconventional attacks. However, their technological advantages meant that any human pilot who tried to fight them conventionally would be quickly destroyed. Sarah's training methodology was unlike anything the pilots had experienced in their formal education. Rather than memorizing standard tactical formations, she taught them to analyze each combat situation dynamically and develop creative responses based on immediate circumstances. The goal was to become unpredictable enough to survive while skilled enough to exploit enemy weaknesses. The first practical exercise involved Lieutenant Morrison and Fighter 3 attempting to engage a simulated hegemony target using conventional attack patterns. Sarah played the role of the enemy, flying Fighter 7 with deliberately limited maneuverability to represent alien technological advantages. The result was predictably one-sided, with Morrison's fighter tagged as destroyed within 30 seconds. The second attempt incorporated Sarah's analytical approach. Morrison was instructed to observe his opponent's movement patterns, identify recurring behaviors, and time his attack to exploit a moment of vulnerability. The engagement lasted significantly longer, and while Morrison was ultimately unsuccessful, he managed to score several hits that would have damaged a real enemy fighter. Ensign Patricia Wells, flying Fighter 9, proved to be Sarah's most promising student. Her natural spatial awareness combined with excellent reflexes made her particularly suited to the three-dimensional thinking required for advanced combat maneuvering. Sarah began developing specialized exercises designed to enhance Wells' intuitive understanding of combat geometry. The training program expanded beyond individual piloting skills to include coordinated tactics that leveraged each pilot's strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. Sarah demonstrated how properly executed teamwork could multiply individual effectiveness, turning a marginally skilled squadron into a formidable fighting force capable of challenging superior opponents. Chief Maintenance Officer Rodriguez began attending the training sessions to better understand how fighter modifications could support new tactical requirements. Sarah's engineering background allowed her to explain exactly how various system adjustments would affect combat performance, creating a collaborative environment where technical improvements directly supported tactical innovations. The station's defensive systems also underwent significant upgrades based on Sarah's recommendations. She worked with the engineering staff to improve targeting algorithms, optimize weapon placement, and develop new coordination protocols that would allow the station's guns to work more effectively with fighter squadrons during future battles. Commander Webb initially struggled with the cultural shift required by Sarah's training methods. His military background emphasized hierarchy, standardization, and predictable responses to tactical situations. Sarah's approach demanded flexibility, innovation, and individual initiative that sometimes conflicted with traditional command structures. The breakthrough came during a complex simulation that pitted the newly trained Delta Squadron against a recreated version of the hegemony attack formation. Using Sarah's tactical principles, the human pilots managed to achieve a decisive victory with minimal losses, demonstrating that proper training could overcome significant technological disadvantages. Sarah's reputation began spreading throughout the Human Defense Network as reports of her training methods reached other stations and fleet commands. Requests for tactical consultation and pilot exchange programs flooded in from facilities facing similar threats from technologically advanced opponents. Dr. Kane conducted regular psychological evaluations of the pilots undergoing Sarah's training program. Her findings indicated significant improvements in confidence, decision-making speed, and stress management under combat conditions. The pilots were not only becoming more skilled, but were also developing the mental resilience required for extended campaigns against superior forces. The most significant development was the emergence of a new tactical doctrine specifically designed for asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. Sarah's principles were being codified into training manuals that could be distributed throughout the human military, potentially transforming the entire approach to space combat. Ensign Wells achieved her first simulated victory against a hegemony-type opponent during her 4th week of training, successfully exploiting shield harmonics to penetrate enemy defenses and deliver a killing shot. Her technique was different from Sarah's original method, but demonstrated the same analytical thinking that made such precision attacks possible. The station's morale underwent a dramatic transformation as personnel realized they were no longer helpless victims waiting for the next attack. Sarah's training had given them the tools and knowledge necessary to fight effectively against previously overwhelming opponents, transforming fear into confident determination. Sarah began developing advanced training scenarios based on intelligence reports about hegemony tactical evolution. Her analysis suggested that the aliens were adapting their own methods in response to the unexpected defeat at Outpost Delta 7, making continued innovation essential for human survival. The success of the training program attracted attention from the highest levels of human military command. Admiral Catherine Shaw, commander of the Outer Rim Defense Force, personally visited the station to observe Sarah's methods and evaluate their potential for fleet-wide implementation. Admiral Shaw's assessment was unequivocal. Sarah's training program represented the most significant tactical advancement in space combat since the development of energy shields. She formally requested that Sarah be promoted to the rank of commander and assigned to establish similar training facilities throughout human space. Sarah accepted the promotion with characteristic humility, recognizing that her new responsibilities would require her to multiply her impact by training other instructors rather than working directly with individual pilots. The quiet engineer who had once hidden among the maintenance staff was about to become one of the most influential figures in humanity's war for survival. The final examination for Delta Squadron's first training cycle involved a live-fire exercise against automated targets programmed with hegemony movement, patterns, and defensive capabilities. Every pilot passed with scores significantly higher than their pre-training assessments, demonstrating that Sarah's methods could reliably produce improved combat effectiveness. Lieutenant Morrison, now serving as Sarah's assistant instructor, reflected on the journey from their first encounter to his current position. The arrogant pilot who had once dismissed engineering staff as irrelevant support personnel had been replaced by a thoughtful warrior who understood that victory required contributions from every member of the team. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, she knew that the real test of her training methods would come when the hegemony returned with improved tactics and upgraded technology. The war was far from over, but humanity now possessed something they had lacked before: the knowledge and skills necessary to fight back effectively against impossible odds. 6 months after the Battle of Outpost Delta 7, the hegemony returned with a massive fleet of over 400 vessels, their formation including new ship designs that incorporated lessons learned from their previous defeat. Intelligence reports indicated that the aliens had specifically developed countermeasures for the unconventional tactics that had proven so effective against their initial assault. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the Tactical Operations Center of the newly constructed Training Command Station, monitoring the engagement through real-time feeds from 17 different defensive positions throughout the Outer Rim. Her students were now leading their own squadrons, putting her teachings to the ultimate test against an enemy that had spent months preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. The results exceeded even Sarah's optimistic projections. At Gamma Station, Lieutenant Morrison led his squadron in a brilliant feinting maneuver that drew the hegemony capital ships into a crossfire between hidden defensive platforms. At Epsilon Base, Ensign Wells exploited a newly discovered vulnerability in alien sensor arrays to achieve complete tactical surprise during her attack run. Throughout human space, pilots trained in Sarah's methods were demonstrating that technological superiority could be overcome through superior tactics, innovative thinking, and the kind of desperate courage that had always characterized humanity's finest moments. The war was far from won, but the balance of power had shifted dramatically in favor of the human defenders. The most remarkable engagement occurred at Theta Outpost, where a single squadron of 12 fighters managed to defeat a hegemony assault force of 60 vessels using coordinated attacks that exploited multiple systemic weaknesses simultaneously. The alien fleet commander was forced to withdraw after losing over half his force to opponents he had expected to. Overwhelmed within minutes, Sarah's tactical innovations had spread throughout the human military like wildfire, adapted and improved by countless pilots who added their own insights to the fundamental principles she had established. The rigid doctrines that had once dominated space combat had been replaced by flexible methodologies that emphasized adaptation and creative problem-solving. Admiral Shaw contacted Sarah directly to report that human casualties in space engagements had decreased by 70% since the implementation of her training programs. More importantly, human forces were now achieving tactical victories against opponents who had previously been considered invincible, fundamentally altering the strategic balance of the ongoing war. The hegemony's response to their military setbacks revealed important information about their society and decision-making processes. Intelligence analysis suggested that the alien coalition was experiencing internal conflicts as different member species questioned the wisdom of continuing a war that was proving far more costly than originally anticipated. Sarah's influence extended beyond pure military tactics to encompass broader strategic thinking about asymmetric warfare and technological adaptation. Her insights were being incorporated into weapons development, ship design, and even diplomatic strategies as humanity worked to build alliances with other species threatened by hegemony. Expansion. The training facility that Sarah had established became a pilgrimage destination for military officers throughout human space. Pilots, engineers, and tactical analysts came to study her methods and adapt them to their own specific situations. The quiet engineer's transformation into humanity's premier combat instructor had become legendary throughout the fleet. Dr. Kane published a comprehensive study of the psychological factors that contributed to Sarah's success, identifying key personality traits that could be developed in other potential pilots. Her research suggested that the most effective space combat pilots combined technical expertise with intuitive spatial reasoning and the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. The engineering modifications that Sarah had pioneered were now standard equipment on all human fighters. Her understanding of both human and alien technology had led to hybrid systems that combined the best features of both, creating spacecraft that were specifically optimized for the new style of warfare she had developed. Lieutenant Morrison, now promoted to squadron leader, returned to Outpost Delta 7 for an advanced instructor certification program. His reunion with Sarah was marked by mutual respect between professionals who had each evolved significantly since their first encounter. The arrogant pilot and invisible engineer had been replaced by experienced warriors, united in their commitment to human survival. The memorial wall in the Mi station's main corridor now bore the names of over 300 pilots who had died defending human space since the war began. Sarah visited it regularly, knowing that many of those deaths could have been prevented if her training methods had been available earlier in the conflict. The most significant development was the emergence of a new generation of pilots who had been trained exclusively in Sarah's methods from the beginning of their careers. These young officers displayed combat effectiveness that surpassed even veteran pilots, suggesting that humanity's military capabilities would continue improving as the war progressed. Ensign Wells, now a full lieutenant commanding her own training squadron, had developed innovative techniques that extended Sarah's principles into areas of electronic warfare and coordinated fleet operations. Her success demonstrated that the tactical revolution Sarah had initiated was continuing to evolve and improve through the contributions of her students. The hegemony's latest intelligence reports, obtained through covert operations, revealed that Sarah Chen had become a figure of almost mythical status among alien military planners. The unknown human pilot who had single-handedly changed the course of a major battle was now considered one of the most dangerous opponents in known space. Sarah's personal quarters contained hundreds of letters from pilots throughout the fleet, expressing gratitude for training that had saved their lives and enabled them to protect their comrades. Each message reinforced her understanding that individual actions could have consequences far beyond their immediate circumstances. The strategic situation continued to evolve as more species joined the conflict on both sides. Sarah's methods proved adaptable to different alien technologies and tactical doctrines, making human forces valuable allies for other civilizations seeking to resist hegemony. Expansion. Admiral Shaw's final assessment of Sarah's contribution to the war effort was unequivocal. The transformation of human space combat capabilities represented the most significant military advancement in the species' history. Without her intervention, the hegemony would likely have achieved total victory within the first year of the conflict. As Sarah prepared to establish her next training facility on a heavily contested frontier world, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from covert intelligence operative to recognized military genius. The quiet engineer who had once been invisible to those around her had become one of the most influential figures in humanity's struggle for survival. The war against the hegemony would continue for years to come, but humanity now possessed something it had never had before: the knowledge, skills, and confidence necessary to fight effectively against seemingly impossible odds. Sarah Chen's legacy would live on in every pilot who understood that victory belonged not to those with the best technology, but to those with the courage to use whatever tools they had with maximum effectiveness. The final entry in Sarah's personal log captured the essence of her transformation and its meaning for humanity's future. They thought they knew what humans were capable of. We showed them that they had never met us before, and we're just getting started.